Hello everyone, welcome back to the Analyst for 22nd of May 2024, where we will be discussing 9 most important articles from the Hindu and the Indian Express. The very first article today is regarding the Himalayas, and this is regarding a recent Supreme Court verdict. In the next one, we'll be looking into the local environmental footprints and the various dimensions of the same. In the third article, we'll be looking to a recent United Nations report on the pastoral communities across the world, and we will be focusing on India specifically. In the third one, we'll be looking at a recent phenomenon of turbulence which has killed one individual along the Singapore Airlines. In the last article, we'll be looking at recent RBI norms on project financing. And finally, we'll be wrapping up the session with 4 more important facts for prelims, because we know the prelims is upcoming soon. So this is news in short for your relevant exam. So stay tuned. So students, in the very first article, we'll be looking at a recent development in the Supreme Court, where recently the Supreme Court has actually stalled a particular tourism project with reference to the concerns related to the Himalayan ecosystem. And in this article, we'll be looking into the various aspects of the environmental conservation initiatives when it concerns the infrastructural development of the country, because there has been always an age-old debate over development versus environment. So we'll be looking into this particularly in context of the Himalayas, and recently, according to recent reports and also according to recent surrounding events around us, we understand that Himalayas are recently becoming very fragile or very weak due to developmental activities. And this is a very important part of a syllabus. When it comes to prelims, we have to look at the various issues and aspects of the environment and the climate change. And with reference to GS3, we have to look into the conservation, pollution, and also a very important term which is known as environmental impact assessment, or abbreviated as EIA. Now we'll be starting our discussion with environmental impact assessment and what is it all about. Now see, legally, environmental impact assessment is actually guaranteed under the Environment Protection Act of 1986. Now to understand what it is, understand a very simple example. Take a forested area along the foothills of Himalayas. It is a beautiful place, I understand, and all of us would definitely want to go to those places for our vacation purposes. Now imagine that there is a builder known as Vikas. Now Vikas wants to construct a tourism heritage resort there. Now this is a private institution, right? And he wants to cut down the trees there and wants to set up, for example, 4 or 5 hectares of a tourist resort there, so that domestic and foreign tourists across the country and also across the world, they can come and they can stay in that resort, while they can, the tourists, they can enjoy the ambience around the Himalayas foothills, and also Vikas will be here earning the revenues from his tourism project. But here we understand that this resort will be coming at the expense of the local biodiversity, because this resort will be entailing cutting down of trees. Maybe this resort will be near a river where the wastes from the resort will be dumped directly onto the river, and it will be hurting the biological ecosystem there. Maybe there shall be a tribal community also near the resort, so they will also be impacted. Maybe they will be even displaced due to this development. And also, forget this kind of resorts. Take examples of serious infrastructural development. For example, the construction of dams, the construction of bridge along the Himalayan system, and also along the forested areas. Now we understand that building dams, right, which is very important for energy security of the country, because from dams we get hydroelectricity. But the construction of large, medium, and even small dams required the massive deforestation of varieties of trees and also the local displacement of the people there. So we understand that any kind of project, be it a private project such as Vikas resort, right, and also the other kind of projects such as dams, bridges, and say even railway development and so on in the hilly areas, we understand that this come at the tremendous cost, socio-economic and the environmental cost of the local areas. And that is why EIA means that there should be a particular assessment or test before building any project in ecologically sensitive areas. The areas which is very highly vulnerable to any kind of human activity, such activity will be leading to larger cascading effects on the environment. So here, what the government has done, government has actually brought in this EIA under the Environmental Protection Act of 1986, where it has combined all the sciences of earth, life and the social sciences, and it will be looking into the comprehensive assessment how those projects will be impacting the local climate, air, water, soils, geology under the earth sciences. It will be looking into the projects and its impact on the local terrestrial ecosystem and also the aquatic ecology also, if there are say resorts built on the coastal areas, or if even the resorts or say the dams are built on say the rivers, so it will be looking into the water regions also. And also when it comes to social sciences, this EIA will also be aiming to understand what is the impact of these projects on the human habitations of the human beings there, mostly the pastoral communities or say the tribal communities, on the local landscape, and also the cultural heritage in those particular regions. So EIA is a comprehensive package which will be looking into the impacts of this kind of projects. Now in EIA there are various steps. To begin with, the very first step starts with the screening of the project. Now here the government authority, the regulatory authority, here the Indian government will be looking if EIA is required for a particular project or not, right? So there will be various types of project which the government will be looking into if EIA is required. Obviously EIA will be required if the area is ecologically sensitive, right? Then the next step is that if EIA is required, if in the screening test the government tells that yes, this project requires EIA, then the project will be going into the scoping stage. Now this scoping stage will be looking brief aspects of the impacts on the local biodiversity. Now by brief we mean that this study will be taken place for a very short period of time. After this scoping aspect, the detailed EIA study will be taking place mainly by the developer. Now in our case it was Vikas, right? When it was the case of this resort, it is the government of India, or it is say the other entities who will be building the dams and all the other infrastructural projects. So they will be actually submitting or say preparing a detailed reports, the short term and the long term impacts of this project on say the every components of this kind of thing that we have discussed here. So it will be also suggesting some recommendations to actually reduce the harm caused to the environment. After this will be going to the fourth stage where this entire EIA project will be scrutinized, and here the public can also be involved in the fourth stage of review. And here by public we obviously mean other than the government, there will be the local stakeholders. It can be the tribal populations here, it can be the local NGOs, right? It can be the concerned various civil society organizations in those regions. So they will be also participating in this review and they will be also submitting their recommendations. Now this public consulting is a very, very important one, because we understand this project or any kind of project will be finally impacting the local people. So their opinion is also sought. After this, if everything is fine, right, then the approval stage will be coming in the fifth stage, where the regulatory authority, for example the government, may be recommending the project to go on, that is giving a green signal. Otherwise it can also tell the developers to totally stop the project, right? So it is in this stage which is the most important part, where the approval will be coming. Now suppose this approval, the project has been approved. After this, EIA does not stop. EIA will be continuing via continuous monitoring and evaluation of the project, right? So here any violations will be attracting penalties, and continuous monitoring, continuous feedback will be given to the government by the developers of this project. Now here, when we discuss about EIA, we have to discuss a little bit of more information, because this information is very, very important for your prelims. Now under EIA we have two kinds of categories. Category A, which will be mandatorily requiring clearance from the regulatory authority such as the government, right? So these projects are actually very, very serious for the environment, and these projects are actually based in the ecologically sensitive areas. That is why here mandatory clearance is needed, and that is why stage 1 or screening stage is not required, because in the screening stage we understood here, right, the authority will be looking if EIA is required or not. But in category A project, EIA is mandatorily required. Now category B projects are further classified into two types. B1, where again mandatorily we have to implement the EIA. B2, where EIA is not required. So these will be some kind of projects where EIA does not even needs to be fulfilled, right? Now, when I'm talking about the regulatory authority, it is actually the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, right? It is actually under this ministry, all the regulatory permissions and everything will be granted upon. And Ministry of Environment is actually also setting up around 7 expert appraisal committees, which will be consisting of experts from both the center and also at the state level. There will be state expert appraisal committees, which will be looking into the various stages of this EIA, and also will be giving the various advices and the recommendations to the government. And these advices are extremely crucial for the successive passing of each of the stage of the EIA. Now, when we come to the topic of Himalayas and the EIA, we have to understand that almost the majority part of the Himalayas is actually categorized as ecologically sensitive regions, and here we understand that any project will be attracting EIA, but there are some exceptions to EIA, such as strategic and defense projects. Now these projects, particularly for the energy security or for say the overall security of the country, such as building proper border roads, tunnels, right, and so on. So these actually have been given green signal, that is, they do not require EIA. Now these kind of projects are actually causing a lot of harm to the Himalayan ecosystem. Then also we find that recently there was a debate in the last 1 or 2 years to actually fast track this EIA process, especially in the Himalayan regions, by actually giving a single window for the developers to apply for the EIA compliances, right? Now this single window means that if a developer is applying to the government for EIA in the Himalayan regions, that particular person need not even go through the various other stages of the EIA process. So this is actually undermining the various multi-step, right, detailed outline of the EIA process, which is actually guaranteeing the environmental sustainability of the region. This single window means that we do not have to maybe also obey all the stages. So if we apply for say any kind of infrastructural projects or say private projects, they can be say applied through one single window, and the government will be looking into the same. But we understand that there are various kind of projects which are going on, such as construction of dams in these Himalayan regions, as we can see here. And also we find that the Himalaya is a very fragile and a very weak ecosystem, because we find that if we try to overpower or say do too much of developmental activities on the same, it has been seen in the last few years and even the last decade that it is leading to a high amount of extreme weather events, such as glacier outbursts and also extreme monsoonal effects and so on. So that is why we have to understand, we have to strengthen this EIA system in the country as of now, particularly when we talk about the Himalayan range. And here we have to look at the fragility of the Himalayan ecosystem through this index. Now this is actually vulnerability index of the various 12 Himalayan states in the country, right? Now we look at this ranking here, we find that the most vulnerable state in India when it comes to their Himalayan ecosystem across 4 parameters. The parameters are socio-economic status, sensitivity to agriculture and production, forest livelihood, and access to information services. That means these states are actually ranked on these 4 parameters with respect to these particular Himalayan regions. And the most vulnerable state, or the state which is at risk from developmental activities in the Himalayan region, is Assam, followed by Mizoram, Jammu and Kashmir, Manipur, Meghalaya, West Bengal, and so on. So we find that this index is ranking the states on the basis of the threats that they face from this particular development. And across the country we can see, right, this is the actual ranking, right? And here when we look at some other instances of the fragility of the Himalayan region, the first reason we have to understand is actually the increasing amount of global temperatures across the world. Now we understand that according to the Paris Climate Agreement of 2015, right, we have to limit the rise of our global temperatures, right, by 2 degrees Celsius, right, by 2100. But we can understand that right now, if you can see here, right now we are in this particular range where already we have breached this 1.5 degree rise. And this is particularly affecting the Himalayan region, because we find that whenever the temperatures will be rising, the ice right, the ice will be melting in the glaciers in the Himalayas, and this is a very serious cause of concern. And that is what actually the Supreme Court recently has taken everything into the consideration, and actually recently has halted the construction project in the Kumaon Himalayas, as this is the actually context of the article here. So recently the Supreme Court has taken cognizance of these particular events and has halted the project. Also recently we have seen many instances of forest fires, particularly right now we have seen the forest fires raging in the Uttarakhand regions, Uttarakhand forest areas. Next, we also have seen rising instances of melting glaciers in Himachal Pradesh, particularly in regions of Sisu, right, and also above the ranges of Manali. So we understand that glaciers are melting at a very rapid rate, and high amount of glaciers melting, this is also leading to an event known as GLOF, right, glacier lake outburst flood, because these melting glaciers are changing the local landform and also the ecosystem of the region, and this is actually leading to flash floods in the region too. Next, we understand in Nepal recently we also saw landslides, particularly due to heavy rainfall events in the Nepal region too. Next, we also have seen flash floods in the early months of 2024 in Kashmir. Next, we also see the endangered species such as the clouded snow leopard and also the musk Himalayan deer. They are also at risk because their population is actually declining at a very fast rate because their habitats are under stress. And we also find that the increased amount of tourism activities in particular states such as the North Indian Himalayan states and also along the eastern India, right, we find that the tourism activities have increased, and this has also increased the need for various infrastructural projects such as good amount of roads, good amount of say buildings, hotels and so on. While these are actually good for the local people, but we have to understand short-term benefits are never good over the long-term impacts. We understand that the rapid development to spread tourism in particular states, in particular hill stations of the country, is coming at the cost of long-term adverse instances for the Himalayan ranges. Then also we find that the mega projects, particularly the defense projects, particularly the strategic projects, and also the various amount of projects that are actually also geared towards spiritualism in the Himalayas, this is also putting a very high amount of stress on the Himalayan region. Also, we find that the energy generations from the various waterfalls, from the various streams in the Himalayan region, right, also is a very big threat to the particular ranges here. Next, we find that the waste management issue is becoming a very serious issue here. We even are finding plastic wastes at the top of our tallest mountain in the world, that is Mount Everest. So even Mount Everest, which is the highest point of our world, that is not free from plastic wastes. So the waste management challenges mainly due to rising amount of population in the region, rising amount of tourists in the region, rising amount of aspiration and development in the region. This is leading to higher amount of say a quality of life in the region also. And here all of a sudden these wastes are also accumulating there with no particular conduit to reduce the wastages. So these are the various issues which are making the Himalayas more and more fragile over a period of time. And here we have to understand that the significance of Himalayas cannot be underscored. More than 1.9 billion people across various nations, not only in India, across various nations depend on the resources that we get from the Himalayan region, right? The Himalayas itself consists of 4 global biodiversity hotspots across the various stretches of the Himalayas, right? We also find the largest ice reserves outside the 2 poles, that is the North and the South Pole in Himalayas, right? It is also the source of 10 major Asian river system, a place of diverse languages, art and culture, right? And also high amount of biodiversity is also found, leading to many unique say avian and also mammalian species in this region. So we cannot underscore enough the importance of the Himalayan region, and that is why we must be taking some immediate steps, such as recently the Supreme Court has halted the construction projects in these ecologically sensitive areas. So that case is actually still ongoing. We have to finally look at the verdict, but as an interim relief, Supreme Court has actually stalled the development here. Apart from that, in 2021, Supreme Court also recommended the government of India to set up an independent national environment regulatory body to actually look into the environmental impact assessment, the more rigorous implementation of EIA in various projects, because in recent times it has been seen that developers and also sometimes the state governments are not at par with the norms and regulations according to the EPA 1986 under the EIA norms. Next, we also understand the strategic impact assessment here. Now, when we talk about strategic impact assessment, this is not only looking into the EIA aspect, where we have to look at the environmental aspect, we have to also look at the social and cultural, right, and the economical and also the security imperatives of a particular project on the local people. So instead of naming EIA, maybe we can name it as strategic impact assessment, because the spillover of any projects that is outside environment will actually spill into the social lives of the people, cultural, economic, and also the local security of the region too. Next, the state governments and also the center must be taking a proactive role. It cannot be following a norm or rules based approach to each and every project. So any kind of project and the EIA norms cannot be one size fits all policy here. So the government must be taking a more proactive approach and must be imposing penalties on the particular projects who are violating the same. Next, according to Mishra committees, right, all projects, all developmental activities which severely harm the local system, local ecological system, must be immediately banned. So this is also a very, very important committee recommendation that we should be abiding by. Next, according to National Disaster Management Advisory on Glacier Lake outburst floods, right, it has been advising to the state governments that we should be sealing of the areas. For example, sealing of around 10-20 kilometers of areas which is actually very, very vulnerable to GLOF events. Next, we also have to have a trans-border collaboration, particularly of the various countries in this particular Himalayan range, that will be leading to collaboration between India, Nepal, Bhutan, China, right, and the various regions of Myanmar too. So we have to also understand that adopting a regional approach to conservation of Himalayas is also a very, very fitting approach. Next, we have to also involve the local governments in spreading awareness, education, and also enforcing the local guidelines of the EIA more and more rigidly. And also here the local governments must be participating in the public consultation, right, phase of the EIA too more proactively. In the next one, we'll be looking into the local environmental footprints according to a very recent study, which is by the name of Water, Air Pollution and Carbon Footprints of Conspicuous or Luxury Consumption in India. Now, this is a very, very important study or a research study which has been done by Shomajit Dhar. Now, according to Dr. Shomajit Dhar, he is actually stressing on the rise of the consumption of this conspicuous good or goods which are of high luxury standards, right? So these kind of goods, while they are being consumed by the richer sections of the populations, right, these are actually leading to adverse impacts on the environment and also on the impacts of the lower classes of the population too. So here we'll be in this article, we'll be looking into this particular research and also the overall impact of the same. And this is a very, very important value addition point for your mains, because if in your mains answers you write these researches, you quote the researcher and you talk about these points, it will be definitely giving you that 1 mark extra in the examination. And this is highly important for UPSC prelims for understanding the impacts on environment and climate change, and also for GS3, where we again have to look at the conservation, environmental pollution and degradation aspects more closely here. Now, here we have 3 important terms. Please note that one of the terms have actually come in the UPSC PYQ in prelims, that is the carbon dioxide footprint or CO2 footprint. We also have 2 more terms, water footprint and particulate matter PM2.5 footprint. Now, whenever we talk about a word which is known as footprints, we actually want to understand the impact of a particular individual or say society or a state or a country of a particular thing. Now here, when we talk about carbon dioxide footprint, we obviously mean the amount of carbon dioxide emitted or say used or say the products that use carbon dioxide by the individuals of society. So in a nutshell, CO2 footprint will be looking into how much carbon dioxide intensive you are or how much polluting you are, because maybe by using normal goods such as cars, such as buses, such as aeroplanes, you are indirectly emitting carbon dioxide. So it will be looking into your lifestyle and it will be calculating how much CO2 you emit in a particular day, in a particular week, month and even year. So according to that, we find that according to various reports, right, the carbon footprints are actually the highest amount in sectors such as electricity and heat, industry, other energy operations, road transportation, buildings, agriculture and so on, because we understand that we use a coal to power our electricity sources. We use vehicles that run on fossil fuels that emit carbon dioxide emissions. So we understand all these processes, right? Even construction of buildings, right? In the industrial processes, we emit carbon dioxide. And we understand the higher amount of CO2 you emit, it will be leading to greater amount of greenhouse gases in the environment, which will be in effect leading to climate change issues. So that is why we find the higher amount of CO2 footprint is never good. Now when we come to water footprint, we actually mean how much water you use on a day-to-day basis. Now there is a report, right, Water Footprint Network, which has looked into various countries and how much water the citizens of this country use on a day-to-day basis, right? So it is the average daily indirect and direct water consumption by the various countries per capita. We find that in India, we have this per capita water consumption as 3,000 liters per day. So as an individual, as an Indian, we use on an average basis 3,000 liters per day of water. So we understand, so multiply this by the number of individuals in the country here. So we find that this is the amount of water that we use daily. So that is what also lets us know the importance of water. Further, if we find that using a smartphone, using a jeans, eating burgers, right, and also having a cup of coffee and so on, these all things actually seem very, very ordinary and normal to you all, right? But in essence, on the environmental aspect, on the water resources aspect, these things are very expensive, because to even use a small smartphone or say a simple smartphone, you need 12,000 liters, right, to even say wear a pair of jeans. That particular jeans has actually consumed 8,000 liters of water, because all these things, while they are produced, they are actually produced in the manufacturing factories, and in those manufacturing factories they use the water, right? They use this amount of water resources to manufacture goods for us, right? So here the last footprint here is the PM 2.5 footprint. Now particulate matter 2.5 is mainly emitted from vehicular emissions, from industrial emissions and so on. So the higher amount of particulate matter signifies that the amount of say particulate matter 2.5, say the amount, say oxides of various chemicals which are emitted from vehicles and so on, they actually are far more higher. Now according to WHO, the ideal amount of particulate matter that should be in the air around us must be 5 micrograms for cubic meter. So this is actually the safe norm. But actually we see in these countries, particularly in India and surrounding regions, we find the particulate matter is very, very high due to the high amount of usage of vehicles and industrial activity in this region too. Now how all of these are coming together? So we have to understand in this particular study here, now this author has looked into the luxury consumption and also according to the various economic classes. Now the author has actually concluded around 3 dimensions. First, that the consumption of this heavy and industrial and also the luxurious items such as jewelry, such as sophisticated smartphones, laptops and so on, right? And also say high amount of vehicles, construction of buildings which are actually say demanded in large units by the richer sections of the population, right? These are having some localized impact on the country. Next, it is also calling for some targeted policy making by the government. And finally, this particular say localized impact is looking into the various negative impacts towards the local communities in this region. So that is why the environmental justice also must be there, particularly for the people who do not have access to those kind of goods, and also those kind of goods are having negative consequences for the environment. So those kind of negative consequences must also be addressed here. Now, according to this study, all the three footprints have increased significantly as and when the income levels rise, because we understand whenever people's incomes rise, right, they will be demanding more and more goods. But will they be demanding more and more rice or water? No, right? They will be not demanding necessary goods, because necessary goods they already have. They will be demanding more Gucci, more Prada, more Lamborghini, and so on, right? But we have to understand these goods come at the cost, high cost of environmental resources, right? Now we find that the richest 10% have footprints nearly double the national average, right? So we understand that the richer populations are actually demanding this kind of goods which are more than twice the national average. So the highest amount of pollution is indeed coming from the richer sections of the population, where the poorer sections of the population, they have to actually bear the impacts of the pollution here. Now also, if you look at the various kinds of goods, such as say the durable goods, consumer goods, education, medical care, private transportation, and all gas, electricity, food, and so on, we find that the richer sections of the population, or say the top 20-30%, top 20%, top 10% of the population, they are actually demanding more of these goods, right? It is obviously certain because their incomes are also rising. Now this is actually the chart which is reflecting the dramatic jump in the 9th and the 10th decile, that is actually the top 20 and the top 10th sections of the population who are actually demanding more and more goods. Now here, among these kinds of demand for goods, we find that air pollution has shown the highest increase, right, followed by the carbon footprint and followed by the water footprint. That means that the richer sections of the population are demanding more and more vehicles, or say more and more private jetways, private airlines, and so on. So they are actually demanding more and more of this air pollution aspects fueled by their vehicles, right? Also, when we understand India is just at the takeoff stage, that means India is just at the initial level of this pollution, or say of this particular pattern, where these richer sections are consuming more and more goods and services right now. Now this is the initial stage. The final picture has to be seen over the next 20-30 years, when more and more Indians and their incomes will also be rising in the near term, right? Such as the use of ACs, such as the use of vehicles, such as the use of this kind of goods, which actually lead to more and more environmental concerns, right? So these will be rising in the near future, right? And here, according to study, the key contributors are actually eating out, right? Having food which is actually very polluting in nature, such as mainly meat and mainly protein based items. Next, we also understand the consumption of fruits and nuts are actually good for your health, but the richer sections of the population, they are demanding more and more of these things, actually to conform to various fitness regimes, to conform to various social influence and so on. So that is what we see, that their demand is also increasing, while to actually grow fruits and nuts, you need lots and lots of water. So that is why the water footprint is also increasing. Next, the luxury goods, right? For example, say leather goods, for example, the various items such as diamonds and so on, they are also increasing in demand. And finally, the energy sources, particularly vehicles and so on, these are the main key contributors to the increasing or rising amount of emissions from the higher sections of the populations. Now here, policymakers, according to this particular research, they should be focusing on, right, a very important aspect of behavioral economics known as nudging. Now nudging is actually defined as telling someone, or persuading someone to actually reduce a particular habit. Now here, that habit is actually reduce affluent consumption, or this kind of expensive habits, right? So here the government must be promoting a sustainable lifestyle. Now here, our Prime Minister, as the Glasgow, right, summit of COP26, the Prime Minister actually advocated a very interesting lifestyle, that is Mission Life. Now, Mission Life stands for lifestyle for environment, and here we have to focus on the main themes here, such as reducing wastage, reducing e-waste, adopting healthy lifestyles, right? Adopting sustainable food systems, right? Say no to single-use plastic, saving water and saving energy. So this is actually a way of sustainable lifestyle, such as using, recycling your goods and services, right? Reducing the consumption of vehicles going via pool cars and so on, public transportation. So these are the things we should be promoting among all the sections of the population. Or even government can actually consider imposing some regulations or some taxes which are actually goods of high amount of environmental pollution. Next, the government must also be addressing environmental justice concerns, because we have to obviously understand the high increase of carbon dioxide footprint, the increased amount of water footprint, particulate matter 2.5, right? So these are actually leading to higher amount of climate change issues in India, and who are actually bearing them? Because the richer sections of the population, they are in their high-rise buildings, but it is actually the slum dwellers, it is actually the beggars, it is actually the lower, or say the middle class, even in the lower middle class populations, who are actually bearing the brunt of this kind of things. So environmental justice must be thought of here, and here the government must be promoting equitable sustainability efforts, and these efforts, right, such as helping the poor and actually getting access to the various goods and services, and also reducing the burden of the same, should not be coming as a burden to these communities, right? So all the initiatives must not be coming as a burden, but as a boon for these communities here. In the next article, we'll be looking into the recent United Nations report on the pastoral communities here, and mainly we'll be focusing on the Indian aspects here. Now, it is a very important topic for UPSC prelims when it comes to economic and social development, and also environmental ecological concepts, and also for GS2, where we have to look at the various government policies and interventions for the development according to this particular community. Now, before going into this topic deeply, we have to first look into the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. Now, UNCCD is one of the 3 Rio Conventions. The 3 Rio Conventions, firstly, it is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, it is the Convention on Biological Diversity, and finally, it is the UNCCD, which is the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. Now, it was actually announced in 1994, and finally it was implemented in 1996, where it was made a legally binding agreement, so that all the members who are actually signatory to this convention have to legally abide by the same, and India is also a member to this convention. The secretariat of the same is at Bonn, Germany, and the main goals here is to combat desertification. Now, see, desertification is actually a particular event, right, which actually leads to the loss of nutrients and soil moisture on one side, and also leads to a reduced amount of carbon dioxide stored in the soils, and leads to higher amount of carbon dioxide emitted in the atmosphere. So we have two sides of desertification. First is actually the loss of soil fertility, which leads to biodiversity loss, because we obviously understand if soil fertility is not there, plants will not be surviving, and if plants are not surviving, right, they will be dying out, and also the communities such as animals and even the human beings, such as the food ecosystem, the agricultural ecosystems, they will be collapsing, and it will be leading to a particular amount of desert-like conditions in those regions. The second aspect is actually reducing amount of carbon content in the soil, and this will be leading to more and more emissions of that carbon content from the soil to the atmosphere, and this will be leading to increased amount of greenhouse gases, which will be fueling the amount of global warming in the around the world, and this will be leading to climate change and leading to more and more extreme weather events, such as droughts, such as, say, various amount of atmospheric events that will be inhibiting rainfall and activities and so on, particularly again leading to deserted areas. So the main goal of this UNCCD is actually to protecting and restoring lands that have been degraded or lands which are under desertification. Next, it is also trying to mitigate the impact of land degradation by actually bringing in innovative solutions. And finally, it is also providing food, water, shelter and also economic opportunities to the locally affected people, because we have to understand people are affected by the desertification aspects, and the people who are most affected are the pastoral communities, right? Because these are the communities who actually roam from one place to another in search of livelihood, in search of, say, rearing animals based on the various grasslands of the world. And one of those grasslands of the world is actually broadly classified as rangelands. Now rangelands are found in diverse areas of the world, right, known by the various names such as tall grass, short grass, prairies, desert grasslands, shrublands, savannas, right, chaparrals, steppes. These are actually located across various parts of the world, right, and they cover around 47% of the earth's surface, right, and more than 50% of the land area of the entire world. And the main features of these kind of areas are actually, these are areas of low precipitation, low rainfall, right. Then also the drainage patterns here is actually very poor, and we also have a rough topography, maybe by rugged hills and plateaus, and also the soil fertility in these areas are already lower. So if we understand, desertification takes place in these areas, right. Now these areas will never be rejuvenated because of their local regions and local climatic conditions, right. Now here the main significance of this rangeland still is actually the amount of CO2 storage within the soils in these particular regions, right, because these particular soils store a lot of amount of carbon dioxide, and if they're degraded, they will be emitting into the atmosphere. Next, it is also very important to underscore their ecosystem services, particularly to the say services they offer to the pastoral communities, because they offer the ranching services, right, or say animal rearing services, because the say oxes, the say cattle of the various pastoral communities, they actually eat various amount of grasses on these particular regions. So the ecosystem services particularly will be also translating into economic opportunities for the pastoral communities. And also these areas, while they are having low soil fertility, but they also account for 1/6 of the food production of the entire world, primarily the high amount of wheat production, particularly in the areas of Russia and Ukraine, right. So these areas are actually also known as the granaries of the world, and these amount to 1/6 of the food production across the world when we talk about the overall rangelands across the world. Now here we find that this particular report is looking into the lives and impacts of the pastoral communities of the impact of desertification. Now here we are finding a very important map where you will be not getting anywhere else. Now this map here we have the various amount of pastoral communities all across our country, right. As we can see, the various communities are actually rearing buffalo, cattle, camels, ducks, goats, pigs, sheep, yaks, right, across all of the nation. And we see that the various states have their own local names for the pastoral communities, right. So it is very important for your prelims to at least have 2-3 glances on this map, right. And the highlight is that pastoral communities depend a lot on their livestock, and the livestock sector contributes nearly around 4% of the GDP. So we can understand that the economic significance of the pastoral communities is actually very high, and actually they need better recognition of their rights and also better access to the markets, because they are actually community who is 20 million strong in India. That means there are more than 20 million individuals belonging to various pastoral communities, and most often it has been found they are not aware of the constitutional rights, legal rights of their own. Maybe they are facing more and more issues of land issues, because they are communities who actually roam from one place to the other, right. Also when it comes to selling their livestock produce to the markets, they do not also have the same, because of the immense competition from the local brands and also from the national and international brands. Also they also have very little influence on the policy decisions, right, because the various states authorities and also various local political organizations, they do not seem these communities to be that much of important for to be classified as a vote bank, because they are actually firstly very small in number, and they are also pastoral in nature. That means they roam from one place to the other, right. So also their impact on policy decisions also not seen too much according to this report. Now also we find that in India, grassland conservation is not a thing which is seen in recent times with more and more emphasis, because the last time a survey of grasslands has been done was in 1954 to 1962, and in this particular survey, which is the last survey so far, grasslands have been classified into 5 types. And please do look at the various types here, because maybe UPSC will be asking this term and will be asking you to what are these actually terms all about, right? So the more amount of conservation efforts in India is reference to the national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, and these are actually forestry based interventions, forestry based schemes and policies for the preservation. But the grassland preservation is not yet a policy imperative, because less than 5% of India's grasslands of these overall areas are actually protected. Next, this report is also highlighting some successes by the report, such as the impact of the Forest Rights Act by giving ownership and grazing rights to the pastoral communities, and also to the recent High Court judgment where the Van Gujas were actually given grazing rights in the Rajaji National Park. And also this report is gradually also observing a shift of the government towards more and more inclusive programs for the pastoral communities via National Livelihood Livestock Mission, Animal Husbandry Infrastructure Development Fund, and Rashtriya Gokul Mission, where all of these are actually trying to promote the livestock development, particularly the dairy activities and the various other produce that we get from the animals. So these are actually also one of the initiatives where the government in recent times they have tried to promote among the communities. Apart from this, the government have also implemented various schemes and policies to actually combat land desertification. And here, firstly, we have the National Action Program to combat desertification, mainly on the hills, because India is a member of the UNCCD. So that is why India must be having a particular program, a particular policy to implement the same in the country. And also, apart from this, India has a desertification cell, which is actually under the Ministry of Environment. That will be looking into the various issues of droughts in the nation, issues of desertification, issues of loss of soil fertility, issues of deforestation in the country also. Then we also have this Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sinchai Yojana, which is actually having this target of investing 50,000 crores actually to focus on providing the proper amount of irrigation facilities, mainly in dry land regions. Now, dry land areas are actually those areas where the water availability is very less, and that is why per crop more drop is actually ensured under this government initiative. Next, we also have this desert development program, which was started in 1995 to actually promote the use of local varieties of crops, local varieties of plants to actually try to de-desert those regions. And particularly we also have this National Afforestation Program and Compensation Afforestation Program, where the companies actually have to mandatorily contribute some amounts of funds or dedicate for the afforestation of some regions for any kind of projects that they do in the forested areas. So these are all the important initiatives that you need to know. In the next one, we'll be looking into the recent event where one individual has lost his life in the recent turbulence accident on aboard a plane from London and Singapore. And here this is a very, very important aspect for UPSC prelims, particularly towards geography, and also for GS1, where we have to also look at various important geophysical phenomena. Now, when we talk about turbulence, right, we obviously talk about the disruption of airflow over the wings of an airplane, because we understand the wings of an airplane, right, it is actually they who actually facilitate the airplane to be afloat on the air. So that is why the air movement along the wings are actually facilitating the easy movement of the aircraft, right? Now here, if this particular aircraft is actually seeing severe amount of wind movements above or below the wings, so it will be leading to upward and downward movement of the airlines or the aircraft in mid-air. Now I hope that some of you who have traveled via airlines, you must have observed this phenomena that during your mid-journey, right, you suffer some up and down during your flight. So that is the turbulence, right? Now there are various types of turbulence. Firstly, this can be due to wind shear, and this wind shear is particularly mainly due to jet streams which are actually there in the upper tracks of the atmosphere. So due to jet streams, due to various say wind fluctuations and the speeds of jet stream, the air parcels above or below the wings actually fluctuate, and that also leads to the upward and downward sudden jerks in the aircraft. Now it can be also due to the frontal say nature of the air masses due to cold or warm parcels of air. Now cold and warm parcels of air actually leads to pockets, right? Pockets of air masses, right? So that means that warm areas are actually areas of low pressure and cold areas are of high pressure, so wind generally moves right in this particular direction. So this actually leads to air pockets, and this is also one of the reasons why we see turbulence. Now it can be also due to convective regions, where mainly the thunderstorms are actually the product of high amount of convective say currents, or say high amount of sunlight and the heating effects over the ground, and this leads to convective currents from the grounds, and this also leads to the say irregular amount of wind in this region. Now this is another reason of wake, where say above the wing we have low pressure, below the wing we have high pressure, and this actually creates a circulatory pattern over the wings, and also this can lead to wobbling of the aircraft also. And this is also one of the reasons why a particular aircraft never goes behind another airplane, right? If you have observed, a particular airplane will be never behind another. It is always above or below of the same to avoid this kind of turbulence, right? Next we have this mechanical turbulence because of say the presence of say small mountains or small buildings. There can be a disruption in the normal flow of air, and if the normal flow of air is actually say impacting a building or a mountain, right, it can actually create say a chaotic air patterns, wind patterns above the building or near the mountains, and if a particular airline is flowing above that, it can be also be impacted due to that same. Next, this is another reason. This is a reason of clean air. Now it happens sometimes the airplanes use the jet streams to go from one place to the other, because traveling along the say velocity of jet stream will be helping the planes to save fuels, right? So, to save fuel, so sometimes the aeroplane uses the jet stream, particularly over Japan and American flights, right? But whenever the aeroplane will be coming outside the jet stream, it will be seeing a drastic difference in the velocity, and that can also lead to the disruption in the air currents and a drop of the altitude. And finally, mountain waves are also seen, particularly near high-rise mountains, where winds sometimes directly blow on the surface of the mountains, and this leads a regional amount of say weak circulation of air. Now this disruption in the local say circulation over the mountains, this also leads to upper fluctuations in the say flight path of this particular aircraft. Now here we have to understand how airlines can avoid turbulence. Firstly, if you're a passenger, you must always be seated on your seat, and always you have to put your seat belts on. So this is the best amount of safety measure as a passenger that you can take, right? Next, turbulence guidelines must be included in the weather briefings, right? Then the government also must be promoting real-time information sharing between the pilot and the dispatchers, and it is here where the air traffic control, right, air traffic control or ATC actually relays the same. Next, there should be turbulence avoidance policies of various aircrafts, and also the various norms and guidelines such as the intensity, say based on light, moderate, severe and extreme, and also the reaction of the aircraft, and also inside and outside the aircraft, all the kinds of guidelines must be stuck by the say airline policy. Next, rerouting using atmospheric modeling must be done. Then finally, we have to also pay importance to the inside flight attendants' personal safety, particularly to their own safety and also to the passenger safety, basically highlighting importance of the training initiatives of the airlines too. In the next one, we'll be looking into recently proposed RBI's project financing norms, because we have to understand when we talk of infrastructural projects, we are actually having many stakeholders of the infrastructural projects. Firstly, it is a government which actually finances various infrastructural projects such as roads, airports and so on. It can be also financed through the government and the other private entity such as in public-private partnerships. And finally, we have to understand these projects take a lot of money. Sometimes the government may not have the same. Sometimes even the PPP model maybe not be enough. Sometimes it will be sometimes the banks, the domestic financial institutions or the NBFCs where these particular projects can actually get the funds from. But we have to understand in recent times we are seeing many issues with the banks and the finances that they are offering to the various infrastructure projects, because with reference to the central infrastructure projects we can understand that due to various costs, due to various delays, due to various other reasons, the projects are not being completed according to this data also, right? According to even we see, right, the long gestation period, right, projects such as say the projects which take a lot of time, for example say building bridges over say a stretch of mountain regions, or say over say a particular say tunnels, right, and also particular projects that leads to the development of airports, ports, because these are actually taking lot of time. So these are the projects which actually require lot of time, lot of funds. Maybe most of the times you also see delay in the projects too, as we have seen. So the most amount of delays are actually in the civil aviation, followed by power projects, coal, petroleum and so on. So this is actually the reasons why, Deputy Governor of RBI back in 2012, right, Harun R. Khan has actually told that the banks are exposed to various legal and procedural risks due to this kind of projects. And that is why recently RBI has taken the heed of these kind of things, and that is why it has actually proposed various important norms. Firstly, RBI has told that the banks which are leading or which are giving funds to these kind of infrastructure projects, they will be needing to have higher amount of sums, for example up to 5% extra money they have to keep safe with the banks themselves, right, for financing any large or say projects, right, because we have to understand the interest or say the profit from the projects may be coming over a longer period of time. So in the shorter period the banks must be keeping extra money with themselves to actually go for the overall day-to-day functioning of the banks. Next, it has also imposed stricter loan conditions such as needing mandatory clearances, right? For example, these projects, these very serious projects which are actually leading to various losses and delays, they will be needing clearances from the bank authorities. They will be also needing a positive net present value. That means the project which will be completed in the future, that project's present value right now must be positive, that must not be negative. That means the future profitability of the projects must be there. Then there must be an independent review based on the various review committees. Also this can be proposed by the RBI too. Next, the repayment norms, particularly due to any project which is actually facing some delays and costs, right, they can only be revised under specific conditions and with lender approval, such as the bank's approval. Next, there should be standby credit, that is actually a special facility or special opportunity to cover the cost overruns and delays, right. And finally, we have to analyze the impacts of this particular revised norms, that this will be leading to higher borrowing cost. Obviously, if the norms are right now more and more strict, right, particularly for these projects, right, the banks are actually having to keep say 5% extra money to give to those projects. So this 5% extra money is actually kind of a burden for the banks to give. So banks will not be much encouraged right now maybe to give more and more funds to the infrastructure projects, right. Now also the infrastructure project developers, they will be also say not be very much enthusiastic to take more and more risks on the long gestation period such as aviation, power projects and so on, because they know that right now they have to be paying more and more fees, adhering to more and more strict RBI norms. But we have to understand these are still in proposal stage, RBI has not finalized them, so please do watch out for the same in the newspapers and in the further analyst discussions also. Now here we'll be discussing 4 more important prelim snippets. We'll be starting with flamingos because recently in the Mumbai region we have seen a recent mass death of flamingos due to flight related incidents. Now flamingos in India are generally of 2 types. Greater flamingo, where we have this whitish, a little bit of purple and pinkish kind of color to their bodies. Next we also have this lesser flamingo where we have more pinkish and more redder colors on their bodies, right? So here their main habitat is actually on the shallow alkaline and saline lakes, lagoons, estuaries, muddy coastal areas, because these flamingos actually feed on fishes. Habitats in India, the most famous habitats are Chilka Lake in Odisha, Severi in Mumbai, Pulicat Lake on Andhra Pradesh, and Rann of Kutch in Gujarat. Their diet is mainly, say, microscopic algae and shrimp, and they are also referred as filter feeders. Now, filter feeders actually refer to those organisms which actually, for example, in this particular example, the flamingos fill their beak with water, and within this water only we have very small microorganic say algae and shrimps and so on. Now they allow the water to flow out, trapping the food within their beaks. So this is actually a mechanism where where actually many organisms use to actually feed in this particular manner. When we talk about their behavior, they actually always are found in large flocks, which are also known as, elegantly as flamboyances, right? And also they are cooperative breeders where the various communities they actually take care of others, say chicks. And also the color of the particular bodies are actually coming from the carotenoids from their diets. They are very important because they are actually bioindicators of healthy wetland. That means wetlands which are actually natural, pure and unpolluted. On those wetlands, we will always be finding this amount of say flamingos who are actually locally suited to those wetlands. In the next one, we will be looking at copper niches, because the surveillance and the monitoring of the recent helicopter crash in Iran, which led to the death of their prominent political leader, was actually possible because of the Copernicus Earth Observation System by the European Union. So this is a global continuous high quality EOS, Earth Observation System, where it is actually the main functions or the main benefits that they actually serve is actually providing environmental management by giving proper scrutiny of the particular say forest regions across the world, and also the civil security applications. The data that are getting are from the sentient satellites, these are the name of the satellite systems, and also from the various contributing missions of the various EU members and the various private organizations, and also the in situ data, that is the ground data based on the various radar on the ground. Now the services that they provide is atmospheric monitoring services, climate change service, emergency management service, land monitoring, marine and security services. So these are the various observations that the satellites actually do. In the next one, we'll be looking into the International Criminal Court, right, because of the recent allegations of Israel, right, on the Gaza area of the same. Now here, International Criminal Court is actually based on the Rome Statute 2002. Now here, India is not a part of the same, India is not a part of Rome Statute, hence not a part of the ICC. Apart from India, US, China is also not a part of the same. It investigates and prosecutes various individuals based on, say, the various amount of genocide which is happening around the a particular region of that particular country, right? This can be against any group or a particular nation. This can be crimes against humanity, war crimes, or crimes against crimes of aggression. Now this is actually the court of last resort, and there are some differences with the International Court of Justice, which is an UN specialized organization also. Now here, the International Criminal Court, they target individuals, but the ICJ, they target mainly the member countries or member states, right? The nature of offenses are much more serious when we talk about International Criminal Court, right? And here it is actually more of the conflicts that takes between the various member state when we come to the International Court of Justice. Jurisdiction here ICC only have jurisdiction in a particular country which is actually a part of the same, right? But here the jurisdiction of ICJ is actually much more wider than ICC, and the actually relationship between ICJ and ICC are complementary in nature. They do not overlap with respect to their functions, and if a case is continuing with ICJ, ICC will not be looking into the same. Finally, we will be looking into the autoimmune diseases, because these are the kind of diseases where our own immune system, where our own tonsils, thymus and the various amounts of, say, lymph nodes, spleen, bone marrow, appendices, which are actually part of our own immune system, they lose the ability to actually fight the diseases, and they start targeting our own body cells, right, which are actually, they lose the ability to distinguish between self or say our own cells and foreign cells. The main causes of this are mainly genetic reasons, environmental factors also, and some lifestyle factors such as smoking, right? And obviously we find that there is no cure for most autoimmune diseases here, and the symptoms for this can be say in across various diseases, say myocarditis, or this is actually a disease of the heart, skin rash, impaired vision, pulmonary fibrosis, and also sometimes joint pain, or even in some cases arthritis, right? So these are actually the important aspects of autoimmune diseases. And with this, I thank you all of you to attend this discussion. Please follow the quiz which is actually following up right now. Till we meet again, all the best for your future endeavors. Thank you.